How we doing? Good to see all you. Glad that you're here. I want to welcome those of you joining us from our campuses and Ada Bible Church online. My name's Aaron. If we haven't met, Director of Student Ministries here, one of the teaching pastors. And wow, crazy weekend, right? Anybody lose power? Okay, yeah, a whole bunch of people. Yeah, and I bet many more at our other campuses. And man, a crazy weekend here at Ada Bible Church. We actually had to cancel our Saturday evening services. You probably heard about that. In fact, some of you probably usually attend on Saturday evenings, and you're here today, and you're like, hey, somebody's in my seat. Thank you, everybody, for being accommodating. As far as I understand it, we have had no major conflict over this issue, so thank you for that. I want to take a second and just thank the people here in our city who work for the power companies, who are restoring power. Yes. I'm imagining lots and lots of hours and hard work, but we appreciate you. If you're here today or watching online, part of our church, thank you so much for helping us out in this way. Hey, today we get to continue this series, Dinner with Jesus. I'm excited about this. I get to open the scriptures with you today and also next weekend. After that, Pastor Jeff will be back. And then in August, we're starting a brand new series on the power of words. So looking forward to that as well. But today, I want to start with a little story about a game that we used to play back when I was in high school, part of the Caledonia Young Life Club, and the game was called Bigger or Better. Who's heard of it? Okay, a couple of you. So here's how it works. There was 20, 30, 40 kids in our Young Life Club. The leader would split us up into groups of 4 or 5, give each group a penny, like this. And then the deal was you would go to somebody's house with your penny, and you would say, this is a penny, would you be willing to trade us something bigger or better? And then sometimes people would slam the door in your face. Not the friendliest types. Or they would go back into their house and give you something they didn't really care about that was bigger or better than a penny. Now, I went to high school in the late 90s, and so one of the things that maybe you would get on an adventure like this was a Backstreet Boys CD, okay? Anybody remember these guys, right? Yeah. And if you're younger, you're probably like, what's a CD? Not that important to the story. Okay. So you get a Backstreet Boys CD, and then you go to another house, you knock on the door, they open the door, you got a Backstreet Boys CD, and you're like, hey, I got this CD, would you be willing to trade something bigger or better? And it just goes on like this for a set amount of time, and then everybody comes back and sort of compares, and whoever has the best or the biggest thing wins. And I'm telling you, we got some crazy stuff when we played this game. Like one group came back with a full-size couch, which is pretty awesome. Another group came back with an old Buick, not a joke, for real. And I'm just wondering, all the kids go home, and then the youth leader's like, man, what was I thinking? I got a Buick, I got a cow, what am I gonna do with this stuff? Some of you guys who have kids are like, wait a second, I just came up with an idea of how we can get some more stuff. We'll send the kids out. Anyway, there's a game called Bigger or Better. It's pretty fun. And I bring this game up because our conversation today is around a question. And the question is, what is better? Conversation about priorities and choosing what's best in our lives. And the story comes from a dinner that Jesus shared with some people from the Gospel of Luke. This is the book that we've been looking at in the New Testament to get these different stories of dinners with Jesus. But let's jump in. Luke chapter 10 is where this story takes place. And this is what we find. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. So this lady named Martha is like, hey, we're gonna have Jesus and his disciples over for dinner. So they came to a village. Let me show you where that village is located. So map of Israel here, Mediterranean Sea, Sea of Galilee, all this stuff. Bethany is about 2 miles away from Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem's like the big city in the area. Bethany is just a really small town. Now, this lady, Martha, something important about her is that she and her sister Mary and their brother Lazarus became very good friends with Jesus. If you read through the gospel stories, you'll find a bunch of stories involving this family and Jesus. And I think that this might be their first interaction. I'm not 100% on that, but I think it might be. And so this home became a very familiar place for Jesus. In fact, I think that when he was in Jerusalem teaching or for some religious festival like Passover where everybody would travel to Jerusalem, I think he would spend his days in Jerusalem and then he would walk out to Bethany and spend nights with his disciples there in the house of Martha and Mary and Lazarus. And so this became a very familiar place for Jesus. And it's interesting that in this familiar and usually comfortable environment for Jesus, that we encounter a very uncomfortable conversation today, a conversation about priorities. And when we think about priorities in our lives, we're talking about what matters most to us. And I wonder how you would answer that question. If I said, hey, what matters most to you? What would you say? You might say family. Family is what matters most to me. You might say career. You might say faith. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways that you can answer this question of what matters most in your life, and maybe it's a couple things. But isn't it true that we have this tendency to drift away from what matters most in our lives? Especially this time of year. It's like summertime, you got more free time, there's less structure in your life, you got vacations, you got the cottage, it's just easier to drift away from what matters most in our lives during this time of year, to drift toward what's most convenient or what's more comfortable, what feels more pressing, or what's more enticing. We just have this tendency to drift away. And I think today's conversation is going to be an uncomfortable conversation because it's going to be a challenging conversation. I think that God is going to challenge some of us to choose once again what matters most, to return to our priorities, to choose what is better. So I think this is going to be a challenging but also a very good conversation for us today. Now, this story about Jesus' dinner at Martha's house has really three characters in the story. You got Martha, whose house it is. You have her sister Mary, and then you have Jesus. Three characters. We're going to be spending a little bit of time with each one of them. And so let's jump in with the first character, who's actually Mary. So Martha invites Jesus and his disciples over for dinner, and let's find out what Mary's up to in this situation. So she, speaking of Martha, had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. So we find Mary on the floor sitting down. What's up with this? Like, she prefers the floor, like she's a crisscross applesauce kind of girl. There's no room. I mean, maybe like there's no room on chairs, and that's like the only spot that she can find. I mean, what's up with this? Actually, I think Luke, the author of this story, is trying to communicate something to us. Because this phrase, sat at the Lord's feet, it's an important phrase. It's a Jewish idiom that communicates something important to us. In fact, I would say that it describes three things. It describes something very specific. And in this story, it describes something countercultural, and then it describes something that changes you. It's something very specific, it's something countercultural, and it's something that changes you. And so let's talk about each of these in turn. Sitting at the Lord's feet for Mary describes something specific. Now, what is that? Well, Luke gives us a clue what he's talking about in his other book in the New Testament. So Luke wrote the Gospel of Luke, which is a historical account of Jesus' life and ministry. And then he wrote this other book, and maybe you've heard of this. It's called the book of Acts, which is sort of shorthand for like actions of the apostles or actions of the disciples. And it's this account of what happened with Jesus' disciples after Jesus left this earth and returned to heaven. It's the story of the beginning of the church. And just random side note here, if you're brand new to faith, brand new to the Bible, reading these two books back to back is a great way to get acclimated with the Jesus story. Anyway, in the book of Acts, we encounter this character named Paul, who's very important to the story of the New Testament. So he was an enemy of Jesus, hated the Jesus movement, he was trying to wipe it out. Then he has this dramatic conversion, becomes a follower of Jesus and an important leader in the early church. And in Acts 22, we have Paul sharing part of his story, and it's in his background that we find an important detail about what it means to sit at the feet of Jesus. So in Acts 22, we read this. Paul saying, hey, I'm a Jew. I was born in Tarsus. I was brought up in this city. I studied under Gamaliel, who was a rabbi, and was thoroughly trained in the way or in the law of our ancestors. And you might be thinking, I don't see anything in there about sitting at anybody's feet. It says that he studied under Gamaliel. Okay, check this out. This is the NIV, the New International Version, right? This is the version of the Bible that we usually use when we're teaching here at Ada. Let me show you a different version called the English Standard Version and how it reads. It says, I'm a Jew, was born in Tarsus, brought up in the city, educated, and there we go, at the feet of Gamaliel. Now, I want to just take a little time out and talk about translations of the Bible. Have you ever noticed there's a lot of different translations, right? And have you ever thought, like, which one am I supposed to be reading? Is one like better? Is one bad? Is like one more accurate and one not? Let me just take a second and kind of explain why we have different translations and what the translators, the team of experts and scholars, are trying to do when they translate the Bible. So the New Testament was written in Greek. It wasn't written in English, okay? So Greek, and these translations take Greek and they bring it into English for us. And you have a version like the New International Version, which we usually teach, where in the original language there's this idiom that Paul sat at the feet of Gamaliel or studied at the feet of Gamaliel. And what the translators do is they take that idiom and they translate it into a similar English idiom so that we can understand it. So in English now it says studied under, and we're like, oh, we know what that means because we say studied under, we get that. Now, in the English Standard Version, which is a more word-for-word, literal, take that word and translate it directly into English type of translation, they take that idiom, sitting at the feet or studying at the feet, and they just pull it into the English without trying to explain what it means. You see what I mean? So now that's why it says in the ESV version that he sat at the feet or studied at the feet. And I just bring this up so maybe it would be helpful if you're like, oh, that's why they have different translations. Also, when you're reading the Bible on your own at home, studying the Bible, which I hope that you're doing, you sometimes can look at different translations at the same time and kind of get a better picture of what's going on. Anyway, rabbit trail. Sorry about that, but maybe it's helpful. All that to say, Paul, Luke tells us, studied at the feet of Gamaliel. And we've said that this whole idea of sitting at the feet of Jesus, what Mary is doing, it's something specific. What is it? It is a formal learning relationship. Paul was a disciple of a Jewish rabbi named Gamaliel. And he was in a formal relationship where he was learning from him. And I find it very interesting that Luke, when he describes this meal in Martha's house, he says Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus, which does not just mean, and she decided to sit there. It means that he's saying she is in a formal learning relationship with Jesus. It's like she's depicted as a disciple of the rabbi, Jesus. And maybe you're thinking, I thought Jesus had 12 disciples. Like, I don't remember Mary being in that list. What's up with this? Okay, so he had the 12 disciples, but he also had a wider group of disciples. There's one story in the New Testament where Jesus sends out, it says, his 72 disciples to do some ministry. And I think that Mary was part of a larger group of people who had made a decision to enter into this kind of relationship with Jesus where they were trying to learn from him. So in one sense or another, Mary is in some kind of discipleship relationship with Jesus. Okay, so Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. This describes something specific. It also describes something countercultural. What is that? Well, what's countercultural about this is that Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus because Mary is a woman. And in first century Israel, unfortunately, women were not invited into this kind of formal learning relationship. In fact, women were not invited into a lot of things. In fact, women were not permitted to speak to men in public. Women were not invited into any sort of leadership role in the community. Women's testimony, the testimony of a woman, was not even admissible in court. Women were excluded from much of life in first century Israel, much of life in the ancient world. They were outsiders. But I'm so grateful that Jesus didn't follow this social custom. He spoke to women in public, like the woman at the well. Sometimes he defended women publicly. I find it very interesting that when Jesus was resurrected, the first people that he showed himself to were women whose testimony was not even permissible in a court of law. Women funded Jesus' ministry, and at least in the case of Mary, Jesus invited women to learn and to follow him. And I think it's important to note that in first century Israel, when Jesus was alive, that he valued women. He gave dignity to women, and he elevated the status of women. And I think that's a wonderful thing. In fact, I think the teachings of Jesus and his movement, what we call the church, have done so much in Western civilization through history to raise the value and dignity of women. I think Jesus has a lot to do with the equality that we see in the world today. And so Jesus, in this sense, was very countercultural. He invited women who were outsiders to be insiders with him, but it wasn't just women. He invited all kinds of outsiders, social outsiders, moral outsiders, political outsiders, ethnic outsiders. Jesus was very inclusive in this way, and he invited all kinds of people, no matter what their background, to learn from him and to follow him. Now, this idea that sitting at the feet of Jesus is countercultural, I mean, what does that matter for us? What should we take away from this? First off, you are invited to follow Jesus. You're invited to learn from Jesus. You're invited into a relationship with Jesus, and I don't care who you are, where you come from, where you've been, what you think, who you are, it doesn't matter. You are invited. Jesus is very inclusive in this way. He wants a relationship with you. In fact, maybe you're watching online because you don't even feel comfortable showing up at a church. And I would just say to you that you're invited, and Jesus wants a relationship with you. And more than that, we would love to have you come in person to our church because you're invited, you are welcome. There's another aspect to this countercultural nature of sitting at the feet of Jesus, and that has to do with us as the people of Jesus, the followers of Jesus. I just believe that we should be the most welcoming, the most inviting, the most inclusive people on the planet because we're supposed to reflect the heart of Jesus. And so a question for us to wrestle with is, who are you inviting? Who are you welcoming? Who are you pursuing? Who are you being relationally generous with, even though it doesn't really benefit you at all? Who are you spending time with in the hopes of someday introducing them to Jesus? Who are you inviting? Who are you including? You know, earlier in this series, when we were just kind of kicking things off, Pastor Jeff gave us a challenge. And the challenge revolved around this strategy of ministry that Jesus seems to have in the Gospel of Luke. And that is long conversations over extended meals. And so the challenge was, hey, share more meals with people. Share more meals so you can have meaningful conversation and build relationships. And this might be an opportunity to return to that challenge and say, hey, over the next couple weeks, as we continue this series and then wrap it up, share meals with people. Invite people into your life. Rub shoulders with people in the hopes that someday you might be able to introduce them to Jesus. I have this friend, and he's been journeying with this friend of his for quite some time, a couple years, and his friend is an atheist. And it's like early on in the relationship, it's like, let's not talk about religion. You're a Christian, I'm an atheist. Let's not go there. It's just gonna make things awkward. And so my friend's been honoring this and just journeying with this person, just doing life with this person. And then recently, this friend said, hey, I need to ask you to do something. It's like, okay. I need you to tell me about Jesus. It's like, didn't we agree not to talk about that? I need you to tell me about Jesus. And I just believe that this friend has been living his life in such a way, just living out the character of Jesus, that over time, this other person, this friend of his, is like, okay, I just got to know. I got to know what's up with you. I got to know what's the difference. I got to know about this Jesus. Because when we live out the character of Jesus, the welcoming, the inviting, the inclusion, I think it's just magnetic. It's contagious, and people just got to know. And so who are you welcoming? Who are you inviting? Who are you including? So here we got Mary. She's sitting at the feet of Jesus. This is something specific. It's a formal learning relationship. And it's in this story, it's cross-cultural because Jesus is inviting outsiders. And then we said this is something that changes you. What do we mean by that? Well, a disciple to a rabbi relationship, you got to understand, in the first century in Jewish culture, this was not just about head knowledge. When Paul is sitting at the feet of Gamaliel, it's not just everything in Gamaliel's head getting into Paul's head. That's not the intention. When Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus, it's not just that all that Jesus knows that over time she would know. This isn't just about knowledge, it's about change. You see, the disciple to rabbi relationship was all about becoming exactly like the rabbi. In the way that you thought, in the way that you acted, in the way that you responded to different social situations. It's like you become just like them. And if you look at this in Jewish culture, it's fascinating. A disciple would do literally everything, including how they walked, like the rabbi. And so this relationship, sitting at the feet of Jesus, should change you. It's not just about knowledge. Here's a good definition, I think, for what it means to sit at the feet of Jesus. It's to humbly listen to the voice of Jesus, not just for information, but for transformation. This isn't just about knowing, it's also about growing. It's not just about knowledge, it's about change. This is about you and I, if we are followers of Jesus, becoming just like Jesus. In order to do that, you have to listen humbly. You have to give Jesus authority in your life to call the shots. The voice of Jesus is so important. And I'm talking about the scriptures where the voice of Jesus is recorded so clearly for us. It's not just about knowing everything in the scriptures. It's not just about knowing all about Jesus, although those things are important. It's about becoming like Jesus. So, if that's true, and if that's what you and I as Jesus followers should be all about, what does that look like in your life? Where in your life are you sitting at the feet of Jesus? Well, if you're here today, you're watching online, and if your heart is open to the movement of God, I would say you are sitting at the feet of Jesus because we're opening the scriptures. And so, good job. That's a check mark for you. But are we doing this in our personal lives? Are we doing this during the week on our own? I think it's so important for a Jesus follower, like mission critical. You talk about a conversation about priorities and what matters most. This is one of those things. For a Jesus follower, this is mission critical to sit at the feet of Jesus as a group, but also individually. And I wonder if you're doing that in your lives, opening the scriptures on your own and just saying, God, speak to me. Show me what you want me to see here and change me. I give you permission to transform me through your words. So Mary, at this dinner, she's sitting at the feet of Jesus. It's a formal learning relationship. It's countercultural because outsiders, like a woman in this case, are being invited in. And this is a relationship that should change you if you are a disciple as you become more and more like the rabbi, Jesus. So this is the first character in our story, Mary. But Martha, she's the one that invited Jesus into her home. What's Martha up to right now? Let's check out Martha and what she's doing. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. Mary's sitting at the feet of Jesus, and Martha is distracted, which literally means to be pulled away. By what? By all the preparations that had to be made. You see, Martha invited Jesus and his disciples over for dinner. That's a lot of people. We're talking about a lot of food. There may be other people there from the village as well. And so she's got a lot of food to put together. Secondly, she invited Jesus Christ over for dinner. You don't serve the Son of God leftovers, am I right? She's breaking out grandma's best lamb kebab recipe or whatever. You know, she wants to put on a good experience for Jesus and his disciples. And so here she is. She gets pulled away, I think literally pulled away to the kitchen. And I don't know about you, but I resonate with Martha in this story. Like, I'm sort of an action person. I think I would have a hard time in that house going like, we got to eat, okay? Somebody's got to cook. And so she gets pulled away. And here's what I think is interesting. The fact that she was distracted tells me that initially she chose the right priority. That initially, I think she was at the feet of Jesus. She chose what was best first, and then she just got pulled away. She got distracted. I wonder, does this ever happen to you? We talk about what's most important in our lives, highest priorities for us. Do you ever get distracted from those things? You ever get pulled away from those things? If you were to ask me about what's most important in my life, one of the things I would say is my kids. So I've said before, I've got 5 kids, and I want to be a great dad. And when I'm home with my kids, I want to be really present with them, And maybe you can relate. Maybe you have kids. But a couple weeks ago, it was after work. I was home, and I was tired, and I was on my phone. I was looking at something or scrolling. I don't know what I was doing. I was on my phone, and my 6-year-old daughter comes up to me. It's a true story. And she says, "Daddy, why are you always on your phone? Is it because you like that more than you like us?" And I said, "Did your mom tell you to say that?" From time to time, as a preacher, I go through things in my life that are not really lessons for me, but they're for you. You know what I'm saying? No. Now, this was a lesson for me. I'm not a horrible person, I don't think, right? My priority is my kids. That's what I want to be a great dad. I got distracted. I got pulled away. And I wonder if you've been there. Something I believe to be true is that every single one of us who is a follower of Jesus has been gifted by God with something. A skill, a passion area that when we use this, it encourages, it builds up the church. It helps people. And maybe for you, that's like serving people. Maybe for you, it's a musical gift. Maybe you have a leadership gift. Maybe you're amazing with kids. And so you have this gift that's not really for you, but it's for others. And sometimes, somebody will stand up on stage here at our church and say, "Hey, we really could use some people in Discovery Village with our kids ministry." And you're like, "Oh, I would be good at that. In fact, maybe you used to do that." And you're like, "Oh, I'm going to do that." Or, "Hey, we need some people. We'd love to serve families going through a difficult time by providing a funeral. It's paid for by us. They don't have to pay anything, but we just need people to come and serve." And you're like, "I love serving. I'm good at that. I'll jump into that." Or it's like, "Hey, we need drummers or, people in our worship team." And you're like, I can do that. I love doing that. And you mean to, maybe you used to, you had every intention to, it's what you should be doing, but something distracts you and you just get pulled away and you end up not doing it. Or maybe your highest priority in your life right now is getting healthy. It's like some area of your life just really got off course recently. Maybe it was your finances. Maybe just kind of emotionally you're going through some really tough stuff. Maybe you got off track with your purity or your marriage or whatever. And it's like, okay, my highest priority right now needs to be getting healthy. I really need to focus on this. But you just get distracted. Something comes along and you get pulled away. Or maybe as we've been talking about sitting at the feet of Jesus, it's like, my priority, I want to spend more time reading the scriptures. I want to spend more time praying. So you set aside some time in the evenings to do these things, and then Stranger Things 3 come out, and you're like, okay, and you just get pulled away by Netflix or whatever. Or maybe there's one relationship in your life that's just really important. You're dating somebody, you're engaged, maybe you're married, and it's like, okay, I just want to invest in this relationship. I want it to be as healthy as possible. I want to be thriving in this relationship. And you get distracted, right? I don't think that we are horrible people. I think we just get distracted. And I'm not asking you to do anything with this right now. This might be an opportunity for us to say, okay, that is what's really important to me, and I just recognize I'm getting distracted from it. Or I should be doing that. I know I'm made to do that, and I've been pulled away from it. This happens, and it happened to Martha, and she's not happy about it. Martha gets pulled away. She's in the kitchen, and you can just feel, you can just hear the temperature rising. And I'm not talking about the cooking fire. Pot slams down. You hear that muttering like in the Christmas Story movie, the dad in the basement, he's going. And you hear this exasperated sigh, or like, wow. And then the door bursts open and there's Martha. She's red in the face, she's got the crazy eyes, her hair is a little disheveled, and she's about to blow up. And here's what she says. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to the work by myself? Tell her to help me. She accuses Jesus of not caring about her. Then she starts telling him what to do. Now, I don't know a whole lot, but I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to yell at Jesus and tell him what to do in your life. Or tell him you don't care about. I don't think you're supposed to do those. Okay, Martha just blows up, and it's pretty clear to us she's the one in the wrong here, right? It's not like a controversy. Like, she's the one that's off base. She's out of line, and she just tees it up and just... How's Jesus going to respond to Martha? And this is an important question for me because I want to know how Jesus responds to me when I'm out of line with him. And so let's move on to the third character in the story, Jesus. Here's his response. Martha, Martha, what's happening here? I mean, is Martha still just going off? And she never helps, and I'm always in the kitchen, and every time you come around, and I got 6 pots. Martha, Martha. Is he trying to get her attention? Is it like a shouting match? I don't think so. I don't think that's what's going on. There's something very unique in ancient Jewish culture when a name is repeated like this. Something really important for us to see. And we get another example of this later in Jesus' life in Luke 13 as he's looking out over the city of Jerusalem. And I think he's seen a vision of the future. He understands what's going to happen to Jerusalem about 3 decades after his death. And we get these words. He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. He's talking about through history how God sent prophets to get the people's attention and how they were persecuted and mistreated by the people. How often, Jesus says, I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. I think Jesus sees a vision or understands that Jerusalem will be destroyed by the Romans. And there will be a siege, and the people will suffer unspeakably, and it'll be so terrible. The temple will be permanently destroyed. And he sees this city and this people that he loves, and he's like, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, this isn't what I wanted for you. And I just wanted to gather you up and take care of you, but you weren't willing. And I think it's this type of tone that Jesus is using with Martha. And I got to tell you, looking back on my life, there have been some times where I know that certain areas of my life were just out of line with God. And I remember thinking, God's angry. God's mad. And I bet he's just saying, man, you blew it again. Figures. But the more I come to understand the scriptures, the more I believe that that's not how God responds to us when we're out of line with him, even when we're living in rebellion with him. What I see in this repeated word thing is that Jesus is just heartbroken and grief-stricken about what has gone on and what is happening and where things are going. And it's like he's saying, this isn't what I wanted for you. And I think he grieves with us and for us over the pain that we've inflicted on others, the pain that we've endured in ourselves. I think he's deeply saddened, but I don't think he's angry. I don't think he's angry with Martha, and I don't think he's angry with you. Because maybe there's some stuff going on in your life that's just way outside of God's design for your life. And you would say, yeah, I'm pretty far from God right now. there's something I need you to hear. And that is the voice of Jesus repeating your name. He's just grieved over what's going on and where you're headed. And he's just saying, this isn't what I wanted for you. I want to gather you up. I want to take care of you. I want to put your life back together. I want to forgive you. I want to heal you up. I think this is Jesus' response to us. Even when we're running away from him, I think he just wants us to turn around and come home. And maybe for you, today is the day to turn around and come home as he whispers your name. This is what he does for Martha. And we see the heart of Jesus in this moment. But Jesus has more to say to Martha. Check this out. He says, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things. I find it very interesting that Jesus doesn't even engage with her accusation and her huge, emotion. He just goes straight to her heart. He says, basically, Martha, let's talk about what's really going on here. You're worried and you're upset about many things. This is what's actually motivating your thinking and your behavior. So what's Martha so worried about? What has her upset? Well, she's got Jesus and his disciples over for dinner. I think she has a ton of respect for Jesus. She wants to provide something great for Jesus. She's trying to do something really nice for Jesus, and she wants it to be perfect. And I think she's feeling the pressure to perform. And then there's this element of hospitality in ancient Jewish culture. I mean, it was a big deal. It was a matter of honor or shame, not just for her and her house, but the whole village to have somebody famous like Jesus. And I think everybody in the village is watching to see how she does, wondering if she's gonna bring honor to the village or shame to the village. And I think she's feeling the weight of those expectations on her. And then there's the whole comparison thing that's going on. She's looking at her sister going, that's what I want to be doing, not this. I wish I was her right now, but she's not doing it. And she's comparing herself and her situation to her sister, and it's making her incredibly unhappy. And so we talk about what's she worried about? What has her so upset? I think it's the pressures, I think it's the expectations, and I think it's the comparisons. And I wonder if you can relate. You feel that? The pressure to perform at school, in sports, at work, do you feel that pressure? The expectations of family, culture, of your boss, and the comparison game. You look at other people's lives, other people's bodies, other people's Instagrams, and you just feel like you don't measure up. And you know what? I think that the pressures and the expectations and the comparisons are often what causes us to be distracted from what really matters. We allow these things to take root in our hearts to become the motivations for our actions, which is why Jesus says to Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed. Or indeed, only one. These things that you're worried about, the pressures and expectations and they're not that important, Martha. They're not really needed. You know what's needed is only one thing, to sit at my feet and learn from me. That's what really matters. And that's the space where we can take these expectations and pressures and comparisons and lay them down and begin to allow Jesus to speak and allow Jesus to define who we are and what matters in our lives and to motivate our behavior. It's like there's an opportunity to exchange all that pressure for the peace that only Jesus can bring. And then I think there's an opportunity to live with peace and joy like we've never really known. That only comes through Jesus. You see, I don't think that we get distracted from our priorities and what matters most to us because we're nasty and mean-spirited people. I think we're people that get distracted by the pressures and expectations and comparisons, and what we really need to do is lay those things down and let Jesus speak his truth over us and transform our minds and transform our hearts so that we can be free and experience his peace. And so maybe that's the better that you need to choose today. Which brings us to the very last thing that Jesus has to say to Martha, and this is a great opportunity for us to close this up. He says, look, Mary has chosen what's better. She chose to sit at my feet. She's chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Look, I'm not going to send her back into the kitchen, Martha, sorry, because she has chosen what is better. And I got to tell you, I want to hear those words from Jesus about me. Aaron chose what was better. Wouldn't you love to hear those words? But one final question for you. Do you need to choose what's better? This conversation today, this story, how has God been moving in your heart? Is there something that's important in your life that you've gotten distracted from that it's like, I need to choose what's better here? And maybe it's just this expectations and pressures and comparisons. You need to lay them down and let Jesus speak truth over your life. And it's like, I need to choose what's better there. Maybe it's like, okay, I need to get involved and serve and use that gift, and I need to stop being distracted. I need to choose what's better. I don't know what it is, but I would imagine that God is moving in your heart, challenging you, calling you to choose what's better. And maybe it's just to return to him, to be gathered up in his arms for healing and restoration. But I would challenge you to make a decision, to decide, to choose what's better. Because I hate the idea of 6 months from now, a year from now, you waking up and going, I didn't change anything. I didn't choose what was better, and I'm here in the same spot, and then you're just full of regret. I hate that idea. So I would challenge you, make a decision and tell somebody in your life that you trust, that they can help keep you accountable. And if you need somebody to talk to, need somebody to sort some of this stuff out, I mean, maybe you're trying to leave behind something that's pretty heavy, I would challenge you to talk to our campus pastors. These guys are amazing people, and this is why they are part of this church, is to journey with people who want to pursue Jesus. Seek them out. Seek out somebody in men's ministry, women's ministry, or Lifeline, whatever you're involved in, but make a decision and tell somebody about it. Because today is an opportunity to return to what matters most and to choose what is better. I'd love to pray for you as we wrap things up. God, thank you for today. We count it a privilege that we can be gathered together. We got power restored today. And God, we're just grateful that we get to meet together as your people and open your scriptures. And God, to take a look at this dinner with Jesus, very challenging as we talk about what matters most. And I just know that some of us need to make a decision today. God, would you give us courage? Would you help us to be honest with ourselves? God, would you give us what we need to take the right steps? And God, some of us feel absolutely trapped with what we're dealing with. Would you bring people into our lives to help us, to encourage us, and to help us choose what is better? God, we're so grateful for your Son that gives us freedom, loves us so much. God, we love you. We pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Hey, thanks so much for being here. Hope you have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll see you next time.